All right, I think we're ready to get started here. We've got a lot of people joining, and I'm sure more people are going to be joining as we go. First, I just want to say welcome, everyone. Hello, my name is Bill Cava. I'm CEO of a company called Generative Labs. It's an AI agency, and I'm also an advisor at CustomGPT. Really excited to have you all joining today. Really excited to be moderating this panel. These are some fantastic speakers and experts in the domain of AI and machine learning. And I just want to let you know, I'm overwhelmed by the amount of people that registered for this event. We've got about 1,300 people registering for this event. Hundreds and hundreds of people have already joined. So it's pretty wild, and it just goes to show how much interest there is around MCP right now. And we'll get into why that is throughout the conversation. But to give you just a quick, brief introduction of the three panelists that we've got on the call here today. So we've got Alden Do Rosario, the CEO of CustomGPT. CustomGPT is a no-code RAG solution that makes building knowledge bases and building out no-code solutions for RAG a breeze. And not only is it no code, but it's also got a powerful RAG API for developers. We've got Santiago Valderrama. Santiago is somebody that you're probably already familiar with based on fantastic content that he publishes on X and LinkedIn. So if you're not following him, definitely check him out on Twitter and LinkedIn. And we've got Roy from Pinecone. Roy Miara is Director of Machine Learning at Pinecone and is doing fantastic things with MCP. And we'll be talking to each of them throughout this conversation today. So let me tell you a little bit about what the agenda looks like. So first, Santiago is going to go, and he's going to give an introduction to MCP. And after his introduction, which is going to really cover the why MCP matters, the what it is, the how you can use it, he's going to get into a demonstration that's showing how to use MCP in a very practical way. So if you're not using it today, then his demonstration is going to show you a very practical way of how you can start using it in a day-to-day context. Roy's going to be talking about Pinecone's journey with MCP, talking about what they're doing with AI agents, talking about what they're doing with MCP to establish better context for AI agents. And then Alden is going to talk about the power of RAG plus MCP and talk about how really MCP is going to help you bring the power of your data to AI agents in a much more seamless way. And he's also going to give a demo of a new release that CustomGPT recently announced, which is a one-click deployment of an MCP server that's going to allow you to take your business data and deploy it in an MCP context, literally with one click. So we'll give a demo of that. And then really, the exciting part of this conversation is that we're going to host, after each of their presentations, an open Ask Us Anything where all of your questions will be answered. And the way that we're going to collect your questions is through the context of the Q&A feature of Google Meet. So what you'll be able to do is click on that Q&A icon in Google Meet, submit your question, and then Priyansh here, who's on the call and is a part of the DevRel team at CustomGPT, will collect your questions. And when we get to the AMA section of the event, we'll be asking your question to the panel, and we'll give you answers and start the discussion around the questions that you're asking. So again, thank you all for joining. Super excited to have you as a part of this event here. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Santiago, who's going to kick things off with his presentation. All right, Santiago, I turn it over to you.
Yes, let me share my screen here. All right, so I hope everyone is seeing this. So let me try to go through what MCP is. And I'm going to start with a quote that this quote comes from Anthropic. During their introduction of MCP, they said that models are only as good as the context provided to them. So obviously, this should give you an idea of what the whole idea behind MCP is going to be. How can we improve the context that we give to our models? How can we improve the capabilities of these models without having to retrain these models? Okay, so MCP here is going to standardize how any AI application or an agent interacts with external tools and data sources. Okay, so imagine you have now two separate components. You have an AI application, so think of Cursor or Cloud Desktop or Windsurf or any other AI application, and we want to create a standard way to connect to any other external tool or database or file system. We want that connection to be something that's simple, that everyone can just put together. That is what MCP is going to solve for us. The analogy that I've read online is that MCP is like the USB port, right? And for those of you who are old enough, I'm certainly I remember where every time you go to the store and buy a device, you had to, find the cables for that device. Every single device came with a different set of cables. USB solved that problem because now you have that universal interface where you can connect, you can plug in that external tool to your AI application or to your agent. Okay, so here is sort of like a comparison here. Before MCP, you have it here on your left, and after MCP. Okay, so before MCP, we have what we call like fragmented development, where if you have three applications and you wanted to connect each one of those applications to three different tools, let's say GitHub, Stripe, and Slack, you had to build specific like code, custom integrations for each application to connect to each one of those tools. If you count the number of integrations, you needed 9 integrations here, right? So it will be M times N, right? You had to build those integrations. That's custom code, custom security, like custom tests, all that comes with that. After MCP, now we have this, I'm going to call it layer, and that will be MCP. And now the only thing that you have to do is build the servers. So each one of those providers, the external tools, GitHub, Stripe, Slack, you will have servers for each one of those, and you only have to connect your applications to those servers. So instead of N times N, now we have an N plus N connections, okay? Because once your application is compatible with MCP, you can connect to any server with 0 additional work. So this is sort of like the big thing coming from MCP here, right? So this is I'm gonna go really quick through this. This is the architecture of MCP, just at a high level so you understand what's going on. Slides will be available after the talk. So you get a host application, and this will be, let's say, Cloud Desktop, and the host application will spin up MCP clients for each one of the servers that you want to connect to. So you have the GitHub MCP server here, the Slack MCP server here, those who are going to be hosted maybe online on the internet. So the host will it will maintain an MCP client connected to each one of those servers. Obviously, those servers will be interfacing the GitHub API, the official GitHub API or Slack API. You can also have an MCP client that connects to an MCP server that's running locally right on your computer. And maybe that MCP server has access to your file system. It's going to be returning information of your file system, okay? So MCP, even though people only talk about tools, because that's sort of like the big breakthrough, the big thing from MCP, MCP supports several primitives, okay? So tools is one of them, but it also supports resources and prompts, okay? So here in this slide here, you see tools. Again, these are model controlled, meaning the model that you're running within your application will decide how to use tools and when to use them. Like, I'm going to show you an example of doing Google routes. So finding the address, the direction, instructions from one point to another. the model will decide when to use that tool, the tool that I created. Resources are application controlled. Okay, so resources here is their data exposed by the server. So maybe the GitHub MCP server will expose certain files, documents, additional context for the application that's connecting to that server to use. And now here the application will decide how to use that. So maybe we'll just use that as extra context for the model to solve a specific task. You can also expose prompts. And these are user controlled, meaning the application will show the user specific prompts that they can use to solve a specific task. So imagine a cursor and you want to do a refactoring, or you want to create some tests using a specific MCP server, and cursor will tell you, hey, pick from this list which type of test you want to create, and that list will show you different prompts. You will select one of those prompts from that list, and then we will use the model with that specific prompt. So this is, again, this is the server exposing something useful, in this case, to the users of the application. And finally, something that I'm extremely excited about, the MCP client can also expose capabilities to the server. So MCP has one characteristic, and it's bi-directional communication, okay? So you can talk from the server to the client. And one of this is the only one that I'm going to talk about is sampling. And this is an ability for the MCP server to use the LLM that's hosted by that application on the client side. So imagine here you have a server, let's say it's the GitHub server, and the application uses that server to complete a task. But to complete that task, the server can use an LLM. So there are two options. Number one, the server could go and send a request online and use an LLM that's hosted somewhere on GitHub's cloud. Or the server could use the LLM that's hosted in the client application. Because we know the client application has an LLM, the server will send a request to the client application and will say, hey, can you actually run this prompt for me and give the results? And that is the way sampling will work. That's pretty awesome. So as a final note here, before I show you a demo, everyone wins here with MCP. So number one, application developers. Now they can connect their applications to any MCP server without any additional work. Okay, so if you're building an agent, if you're building an application, that's an LLM-based application, you have access to all of the MCP servers that are out there, and you do not have to create custom integrations for all of them. That is huge, probably the biggest one of the advantages of MCP. Anyone building tools or APIs, like the GitHub team, the Slack team, the Stripe team, anyone who's building those tools can now publish an MCP server and see immediate adoption by anyone who's building LLM applications. Because adopting those servers, it's like this, right? It's very simple with MCP. And finally, end users are going to benefit from better applications, because if we extend the capabilities of a model, obviously we can now build bigger and better things with that. So with this said, again, slides are going to be available at the end of the talk. Let me show you here a quick demo. I'm not going to get obviously into the development of all of this, but maybe I'm going to give you an idea of what this looks like. So before this presentation, I built a very simple MCP server that has one tool that I'm exposing. And that tool is basically, it's going to give me, I'm going to give it like an origin and a destination. And that tool will use the Google Maps API return the basically directions from one place to the other. Okay, so that's what the tool does, the MCP tool does. So here, what you're seeing here on my screen is Postman, which, by the way, they just added MCP support. It's amazing if you want to debug an MCP server. And here I'm connecting to that MCP server here. What you're looking at here is the path on my computer of the code that implements that MCP server. Okay, in this case, this is a local MCP server. I could be connecting to an MCP server that's hosted online somewhere, but in this case, it's running on my computer. I'm going to connect to this MCP server. Now I have a connection here. You can see the tool here. I had it loaded before I connected. That tool is called Get Route, and it receives 2 parameters. Miami and Tampa is what I have here. I can put anything. I'm going to put Orlando, Florida here. Okay, so I want directions from this origin to this destination. And this is me, again, testing it here. So I want you to see the results. I'm going to run that. And as you can see, I'm going to go to the preview. This is the answer that I got from my MCP server. I get what the starting location is, the end location, and I get all of the steps from the origin to the destination. So this MCP server is working. Now let's go to Cloud Desktop. And now we're going to try Cloud Desktop here with that MCP server. If you have Cloud Desktop, you can go to your settings. And I think they have like a developer section. Here it is. In this developer section, when you click on Edit Config, this is going to open a file. I think it's a JSON file. And in that JSON file, you can follow the instructions to set up any MCP server that you want. I did that. Just, it's very simple. I just need to specify this path that I have here, this command and this path. And now that MCP server will be available to my model. So now let me ask something here. I'm going to say, give me route directions between Miami and Tampa and show them to me in Spanish. I don't know. Just want to add something here that engages the model. I just don't want to just get results directly from the MCP server. So I'm going to post this. Let's see if this works. So I send that query. Look at this. So now Claude here is detecting that it has access to an MCP server. So notice how it's calling get route. Let me open this. It's passing Miami and Tampa as the origin and destination parameters. Claude is doing that for me. I did not have to specify that those were the 2 parameters for Claude to call. Claude is reading the specification of MCP automatically, and it's deciding how to share that data. Here is the response. And now these are, I hope you trust me, these are the direction instructions in Spanish that came from the MCP server. So as you can see, now I can keep using Claude, I can keep doing things, but anytime I need directions, I can get them directly from Google Maps. I don't need to rely on the information, on the training data that was used for Claude to do this. So that's my demo. With that being said, I yield back.
Fantastic, Santiago. Thank you so much for that. I can tell by all the claps and reactions you're getting here that everybody's excited and happy with that. So thank you again so much for that. All right, we're going to turn it over to Roy now. Roy, again, is the Director of Machine Learning at Pinecone, and he's going to share some information about what Pinecone is doing with machine learning and his thoughts regarding that. All right, Roy, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Gil. So I'm going to pop up the slides. Let me know when you can see them. Cool. So yeah, I want to share with you kind of maybe a view into how we in the kind of AI infrastructure space are looking into MCP and how we think about the future of MCP for builders and for developers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just us and kind of how Pinecone and Pinecone Assistant, and just to give you the journey step by step of how we kind of grew with MCP. And then let's talk about the future, because I think that's the even more interesting part. So Pinecone, if you don't know us, we're an AI infrastructure company founded in 2019. And our mission is to make AI knowledgeable. And the way we think about the space is we start from the bottom layer of our vector database. This is what we kind of mostly known for. And since then, and since launch, we also added model inference and Pinecone Assistant. And Pinecone Assistant is kind of our thought and our view of what would be a RAG infrastructure product as a service. So just to give you an understanding of the architecture of how RAG systems are built, usually kind of how we process data on the way in, congestion, and another kind of layer of how we process queries and how we do this kind of retrieval and augmentation. So this is really kind of where we were building early and like end of next year, early this year, when we launch. So, MCP launched on November 27, and we were kind of looking at this at the beginning and kind of, okay, this is cool. Something is happening. And actually, before you all joined, I think we had a conversation between ourselves about, it's really, really cool that something like MCP is really catching, and everyone is kind of is joining kind of the standard. And the beginning was mostly around those local clients, right? So there was like this example of like the Get Weather application that people had kind of show how to connect to Claude. But this was kind of the beginning. And we GA'd the assistant around January of 25, sorry. And what we kind of, our thinking at the beginning was, hey, we are really focusing on kind of giving API for context, right? We didn't launch any MCP server yet, but context was really something that we thought about from the beginning of our product. And then we started seeing local servers popping and people really starting to adopt both infrastructure and other services as kind of MCP, and people are actually using it. And, if you were around anywhere like on LinkedIn or on Twitter, you kind of saw it coming, right? And then we started thinking, okay, what is MCP for agents, right? Because Pinecone, we're an infrastructure company. Obviously, we're selling to builders. And how would those builders think about agent building? And how does MCP changes agent building for them? And I think Santiago mentioned it, and also in his demo, and you can kind of get into the head of people that are building in the space and like, what is MCP solving for them, right? Then somewhere around January, we kind of had this aha moment. And it was kind of at the beginning hiding in the MCP specification, talking about remote MCP servers. And I would remote MCP servers. At that point in time, authentication for MCP servers was not there yet, and kind of this was still something that the specification was starting to adopt. But this was the aha moment for us, right? Because in the moment where we will start solving this authentication, then companies could start hosting those MCP servers and could start basically selling the product to a new layer of interface. So at that point in time, we started contributing on a couple of areas and on the SDKs, on the inspector, kind of adding those custom headers, started to think about API key authentication for MCP. This was kind of this point in time. On March, we already kind of finished building and I think this was a really interesting experience because at one point we just released it to the world and didn't tell anyone. We're like, MCP is basically just another layer of the API, and let's just put it out there. And we just put it out there and start working with some of our customers and internally and kind of thinking about how people are using it. And then on April, we actually did this kind of a triple launch where we launched our remote MCP server for Assistant. We launched our local MCP for developers and the developer MCP, which, we call it like the vibe coders unite. So people that are developing on top of our platform could actually have an MCP server that helps them develop. And really, I think this is kind of, so as I mentioned, this is what we have today, like 3 layers of different MCP server, connecting to the services, the Pinecone database or Pinecone assistant that we are exposing, and why it matters to us and why we think MCP is interesting. I think Santiago kind of, I was looking to Santiago's, he shared his slides before, and I was like seeing that the first slide is like context is quoting around, models are as good as the data or as the context that they have. So context is the medium, right? And I think this is something that is really shifting a lot the way people think about building knowledgeable application. And we also think it narrows the gap between the agent that I'm building and the knowledge that this agent has to have in order to operate, regardless of the vertical, regardless of the use case, right? And I think this is really, really important to us. So the future, or where do we see the future? I think our strategy, if I had to put it in 2 words, is MCP everywhere, right? Because we view MCP as the same way that we think about our product is, every interface, every API will at some point have MCP layer that serves and helps agents and other services connect, right? So I think with time, what we're going to see is more and more and more services that are going to get connected to MCP. 2 interesting points that we kind of think about from the MCP developer point of view is, 1, how would multi-step interaction look like? So if you're playing around deeply with MCP, you start seeing that multi-step MCP interaction gets, this is an area that has to be kind of solved really, really well, for 30, 40, 50 call MCP calls, right? Things, so this is one area that we think we're going to improve on. And this idea of meta context, right? So it's not just, and Santiago mentioned it, it's not just the context that I'm going to provide to the LLM, it's also the different tools and the different, and the ability to have the agent interact with this context. And I think this is really revolutionary. For the first time, the client side is also opinionated about the relationship with the server, right? And it's not like a unidirectional thing. And my last point is that, and we talked about this before, MCP is going to get fused into the APIs, right? So this is like already on the beta API for Anthropic. OpenAI are adopting it. So really think about, as a builder, having MCP directly into the API really makes development, really shortens the distance that you need to go to, and really puts a lot of the value into the hands of companies that are developing those MCP servers. So I think this is really, really interesting and really, really exciting for people that are developing in this area. So yeah, that's about it. And I think the future is really. We at Pinecone are really, really excited about the future of MCP, and I think you should all be. Like, thank you.
Thank you so much, Roy. Really appreciate that and insights. Okay, Alden, I'm going to turn it over to you now. So why don't you share your screen, and you've got the floor.
Great. Thanks, Bill, and thanks to this wonderful panel. I'm Alden Do Rosario, the founder and CEO of CustomGPT.ai, and we are happy to put up this event. So let me share my screen and give you a quick overview of what CustomGPT is and how we are fitting into the MCP ecosystem, right? So basically, CustomGPT allows you to create custom AI agents that are trained on your business content, right? And the most important thing for us is that business users should be able to do this with no code and developers should be able to do it with like 2 to 3 lines of a RAG API call, right? Most of the people on this call are developers. That's why we are known for our RAG API, right? It's been benchmarked at #1 for both accuracy as well as hallucination, right? Mostly people use us for questions, and the anti-hallucination and the citation aspect of it is really important to our business users. But as you all know, the biggest challenge with any form of AI is the data. And so we've created these 100 plus integrations and these 1400 plus file formats that we support, by which businesses can bring in their data, whether it's their website, whether it's their YouTube channel, whether it's their feeds, podcasts, videos, whatever, and do it in a no-code fashion, right? You shouldn't have to involve IT. You shouldn't have to hire solutions providers to make that happen. Give me 1 second. I don't know why this is not scrolling. Let me try a different way. Yeah. So what is the power of, bringing RAG to MCP, right? The big problem right now is with most businesses, the knowledge in those businesses, whether it's the technical documents, whether it's their website, whether it's their videos, is spread across all these various different sources. They are in the support system, they are in the learning management system. And what RAG plus MCP does is it allows AI agents to access that information, irrespective of where it might be, right? So using a tool like CustomGPT, you can create a RAG that brings in all of the information from different sources and presents it as one simple MCP server, right? By having a protocol like MCP, agents can now just get the information irrespective of what the knowledge source is, right? Now, this is very powerful because when we talk to businesses, the #1 pain point is they have information that is spread across all sorts of places, wherein even a simple support ticket might require the support person to go and check in like 6 different places to answer a simple question like, what's there for lunch, or how many bathroom breaks can I take, right? So these are the types of problems that happen when enterprises have the information in very different sources, right? Now with RAG and with a protocol like MCP, you can now have a tool like Cloud Desktop or even your own agent be able to retrieve the information in real time from wherever the information resides, right? Being able to have a RAG that is always up to date and that does not hallucinate gives a lot of power to businesses, right? So what has Custom GPT done? Like what we've done is our core mantra is about simplicity and being able to very easily be able to have an agent with your information and now expose it to all of these MCP ecosystems, right? So you can start with your data. Within minutes, you can create your custom GPT agent, and then with a single click deployment, you can have a URL that you can plug into your MCP client agents or into tools like Cloud Desktop, right? So what is the real world impact of this? This now means that your knowledge can be connected to various sorts of apps and agents, right? And that's why we call this the N by M connection multiplier, right? And even though right now it might seem complicated, this whole thing will be simplified where you should be able in minutes to connect your knowledge to various sorts of tools and apps, right? This whole concept of let's do a 6 months project, that is now gone out the window, and the timelines are now collapsing to minutes or hours to deployment, right? So let me give you a quick like demo of where a custom GPT fits into the picture, right? So super simple to use. Like to create a new RAG, I'll show you. Like it's literally you press a button and you paste in your website. Like in this case, we are just going to use the Vanguard institutional website, and that's it. Now this whole website is going to sucked in. It's going to be created into a RAG. We use Pinecone for vector database. It'll do the chunking, it'll have the accuracy, the hallucinations, and all of that put together in a matter of minutes, right? So you saw how simple it is to create this GPT, right? For purposes of MCP, like while this is building, this will probably take a couple of seconds or minutes. I'll show you the previous one that I had already built with the same website. And the usual interface is to query the RAG using the normal chat interface. But for the MCP aspect, it is literally a one-line endpoint that is now available. So we have these instructions for Claude and Cursor and whoever are the MCP clients, but my new favorite one is this single endpoint, right? You just take this endpoint and now you can plug it into anywhere that MCP has to be used, right? Just before this call, in a matter of a few minutes, I was able to integrate it into the OpenAI API's new responses API. They added support for MCP about 8 days ago. And with one line change, the RAG that was just built with the Vanguard website is now integrated straight into the OpenAI API, right? This is the one that the whole world basically knows, the one import OpenAI and few lines of code, and boom, the OpenAI API is now connected to the RAG with the website that was built, right? So we are super excited about what this does to the ecosystem and hope that both business users as well as developers can very quickly get rolling with both RAG as well as the MCP ecosystem. Yeah, so that's
Excellent.
what I have. Over to you, Bill.
All right. Thank you so much, Alden. Yeah, that demo is pretty impressive. I know probably a lot of the developers on the call struggled to get their MCP servers running, and what you demonstrated there made it pretty simple to create the MCP endpoint with just a single click. So my question for you, and now we're entering the AMA section of this event where we're going to be taking the questions from the crowd. But the first question I'll ask for you, with regards to the demo that you just showed, do you think the MCP is ready for the non-tech crowd yet?
My honest answer on that is probably we are an inch away, right? Like I have a feeling that when tools like ChatGPT and the web version of Claude, when they make it copy pastable for normal users to be able to use MCP, I think that's where the moment of truth will be. In my mind, my perfect user is always like some 65-year-old grandmother, and when it is compatible with her ability to use a tool, I think at that point, MCP is ready for business users. That's the way I see it. And we are probably like 1 to 2 inches away. I won't be surprised if Anthropic and ChatGPT both do that in like a matter of days.
Right. So you think we're in the time frame of days, not months.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, now switching to the other end of the other end of the spectrum and looking at developers, Roy. So I know that Pinecone has a very active developer base. So can you give a little bit of perspective on MCP as it relates to developer experience and what you think in terms of how MCP is going to affect the developer experience over the near term and maybe over the next 6 months to a year?
Yeah, so I think, and this is an interesting question. So I think we need to think about two layers, like developers, like individual developers, and developer organization, right? Because I think you kind of have to look at both. So I think developers are going to find that a lot of the tools that they are using will have MCP connectors and will be kind of used as a tool in your development lifecycle. So like if you want to run a security review of your open source libraries, if you want to do operations on GitHub, you can do it via MCP, extracting knowledge for documentations, right? So for the individual developer, that's really easy to do, right? To see how this makes a lot of difference tomorrow, right? Because if you think about it, a lot of the effort is now going to the developers in GitHub or to the developers of Snake or some other kind of developer tool, right? To actually build the logic and kind of make it really comfortable for your cursor and your life easier, right? So that's the developer. But I think the more interesting part is the developer organization. So organizations that has many, many developers and are centrally kind of starting to build MCP layers for specific tooling for this company or this enterprise, right? And now the internal kind of development team that are doing those developer tools for this organization have a superpower for exposing this to all developers in one go, right? So, you're developing some internal application, you now have to kind of educate 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 engineers, right? And here with MCP, you're actually able to expose it in a click of a button. So I think both of those kind of really enjoy some new technology that are giving to them.
Excellent. Thank you, Roy, for that. Santiago, prior to the conversation here, before we opened it up, you and I were talking about the MCP protocol, and I had mentioned that originally I was actually a little bit skeptical because, as I mentioned at the start of the call, my background is in content management, knowledge management, and information retrieval. And there have been a lot of standards that preceded MCP that tried to effectively achieve the same results. So, I was skeptical, maybe a bit jaded from my history and experience. So I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think made MCP different? Why has it succeeded where a lot of others have failed?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are 3 fundamental reasons that it succeeded. Number one is that I think this is the fundamental one, is solving a real problem, a problem that exists and that people can feel, right? So this is actually a problem. And together with that, MCP is not just specification. They did not release a blog post and just a document. They came live with a bunch of servers, very useful servers, already working. So from day one, people saw the benefits of using MCP and they were able to connect to it. So I think that's number one reason. Number two is the brand of Anthropic. Obviously, they are a developer brand. They're highly trusted. So of course, people were going to listen to them. And number three is that MCP comes or sits on top of previous standards or let's call it specifications that were very successful, and MCP is benefiting from them, like APIs and LSPs, like language server protocols. That's where MCP is getting all of their clues, and that's why it caught up. Like, in my opinion, everyone was paying attention because of that.
Yeah, agreed. It escaped the, as I call it, the chicken and egg problem that many standards fall into. The chicken and egg problem that many standards fall into. All right, so we're going to open up questions now to the audience, and we pulled out some questions that people have asked. So the first question here is with regards to access, credentials, session management, related concerns typically handled in an architecture where the data flows through MCP connected to services that require authentication. So how is all this managed? So what do you think about taking this one, Roy?
Yeah, so actually I mentioned it during my slides. We actually have really kind of looking closely on this authentication. And I think there are basically two ways, right? One that is interesting is that, for example, if I want to authenticate into something like GitHub, right? As a developer, I would want to have some kind of authentication mechanism, like that requires my opening up some like a wizard flow for authenticating, right? So this is like a one consumer side. For the development, like developers, so if you have a service that is API key based, right? Then I think basically if the communication is secure, the API key is passing normally like every other SDK that you're used to. So I don't see like a big problem there. But I do think that on the flip side, MCP is posing new security concerns and a new vector surface area for attackers. So it's not like, I'm saying it's completely safe, you shouldn't think about it, but yeah.
Yeah, number one, everyone is thinking about this right now. Obviously, MCP is pretty new. The Anthropic team right now, as we speak, is working on the auth 2 part of the specification. So there's going to be more to come. Also, when you're thinking about MCP, think about the application layer. There is a host application, there is the MCP protocol, and there are the MCP servers. So if the host application should be responsible of doing the authentication of, let's say it's going to be an auth 2 authentication. So a user, before accessing the MCP tool, a user will have to authenticate with the server. We're going to get back a security code, a token, and that token will be passed to any requests done by the MCP server. So from that point of view, it's like just accessing an API where you, using that token, you're delegating your persona to every call that you make. That being said, we're still working on it. And when I say we, I mean as an industry. We're trying to figure this out as we go. There are going to be companies exposing data on MCP servers that they should not be exposing. That will happen just like it did when we were starting building APIs for the first time. Yeah, hopefully that makes it clear.
Yeah, that was great. And I think that gives us some good information with respect to both of the questions that have been asked on the screen. So I'm going to jump to the next slide here. And Alden, the next one is talking about the advantages of MCP, the downsides of MCP in the real world that need to be considered in terms of security we touched on, but compatibility testing. Why don't you give some thoughts on that one?
Yeah. The biggest advantage, I would say, is the ability for these AI models to automatically call these APIs, right? Before MCP came along, you had to teach each AI what an API is, what the parameters are, and a lot of things which was sort of hard-coded, right? Even something as simple as call stripe would be hard coded and say like, okay, pass these parameters in, and this is how you call Stripe, and here are the functions, right? And what MCP is doing now is making it like universal, such that the LLM can automatically figure out like whether to call the MCP server and what to pass in. So that automation of it is improving a lot of the friction and making it much easier for these agents to talk to each other without having to hard code everything, right? What is the downside? Yeah, just like any other API, you have to have this compatibility, you have to have this testing, the security we've talked about. Is the tool even being called? Why is the tool being called? What happens to ensure that the tool doesn't get called or is called? All of those things are testing that will need to happen. So from a developer perspective, that does not change. Like before this call, I was, integrating MCP into OpenAI's new responses API. And for 3 of my queries, like on one of the 3 queries, it just didn't call the tool. So I had to go and figure out like, why was the tool not called, right? Then put in instructions for those. In terms of the differences, I think we've covered that, instead of hard coding and saying, here's exactly the specification of the API, you're letting the LLM sort of almost like figure it out on the fly, making it much smoother. Like, without MCP, I don't think we could have this one-click type deployment that we built.
Yeah, just to add a couple of things. So number one, what the biggest disadvantage from my point of view is that tool calling is probabilistic when you're using MCP. That means that the model is deciding what tool to call and when to call that tool and how to pass the parameters. And that is hard to, it's very hard for us to ensure that that will happen reliably. This is completely different from an API where your application is always going to call the API the way you programmed it. An MCP, that's not the way it works. A model makes that decision. That is a big, big downside of MCP, and something that is going to get better as LLMs get better at not hallucinating. One of the big differences between MCPs and APIs is that APIs were created for developers. We developers read APIs. We developers understand how to use those APIs. We developers hard code the calls that we want to make to those APIs. MCP was not created for developers, was created for models. Okay, so the way we write the interface of an MCP server is completely different to the way we write the interface of an API. Completely different. A second thing, and I'm going to shut up, MCPs have persistence. We can have context. We can have memory and long-lived sessions, which is usually not the way we use APIs. You can do that with an API, not the way they were designed for. Nobody does that, but MCPs, they do. So that means that we can keep context between different calls to an MCP, okay? Not to an API. Let me shut up so we can go to other questions.
Great. No, that's great. That's fantastic. We're actually about 2 minutes from the top of the hour. We probably have time for maybe one more question, but what I want to also do is bring up on my slides here just quickly the QR code for anybody that has to drop. This QR code, if you bring up your phone and hit this, it's going to take you to a page with the contact information for each of the presenters, so that if you want to hit somebody up on X, or you want to continue the conversation or try out one of the demos, you can get links to do so through this QR code. So while we have 1 minute left, I'm going to call out a couple questions that were asked with regards to how you built the demo. So Santiago, maybe in 30 seconds, you could talk about how you went building the demo, and specifically people were curious about the MCP server aspect of it, what you did to build that server aspect of the demo. And then afterwards, Alden, if you could talk maybe about the demo that you gave and talk a little bit about the technical side of that.
Yeah, so the demo was built using TypeScript. So one way to build it, building an MCP server is very, very simple. There are plenty of documentation online, but I'm going to give you an even simpler way to do that. So Postman just released, if you Google Postman space MCP, their web page will allow you to generate an MCP server for any of the APIs that they host. So that means that you can click, and have an MCP server downloaded to your computer that you can connect to cloud, desktop, or any API out there. Actually, I did that for the Google Cloud Route, and then I went into the code and I modified it so to return only what I cared about from that API. So that's how you could build that MCP server. How I built my demo. There you go.
Fantastic. Thank you, Santiago. Alden, anything you'd like to share with regards to the demo you gave?
Yeah, for me, keeping with my 65-year-old grandmother theme, went into CustomGPT, copy-pasted the one-line MCP server, and then I did a little bit of vibe coding and use OpenAI's, like they had a small snippet of like 5 lines, went ahead and replaced that one line, and it was ready to go. So basically, I don't code that much, but using a little bit of Claude and replacing that one line, I was able to get this going.
I know we're at the top of the hour, Bill, but one question I was reading here, the QA, and this question I've seen like 20 times, so I'm going to try to answer it, is just give me a use case. Why do I need an MCP? Why not just an API? So just going to give you a very simple use case that I built for the class that I teach. The class that I teach, people have to connect to AWS and manage servers on AWS, different endpoints. They have to stop them, restart them, check if they're working. So there is a bunch of commands that they have to run. So what I've done over the years is create tools for them to do that very easily, so they don't have to remember the commands. But guess what? Now with MCP, I built a simple server. And the way you manage those servers now is by asking Cursor. So right from your IDE, you can ask Cursor, hey, is my endpoint running? And Cursor knows how to use the MCP tool that I built, connect to AWS, check the specific server, and return the status of the server. And even Cursor knows, like, yes, it's running. Do you want me to shut it down? And I can say, yes. And Cursor does that for me. I don't have to remember the commands anymore. My students don't have to remember the commands. They don't have to look them up. They don't have to run in. They don't need to know the order that those commands have to be run. Like, obviously, you're not gonna restart a server before you start it. So you need to have a server first. So now Cursor does all of that for them by using an MCP tool. That's just one example that I built. Hopefully this gives you ideas of what you can do with this.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a fantastic use case. I know that, as Roy mentioned earlier, with respect to the developer experience, MCP is truly changing how developers build and the entire workflow there. So, all right, we're a little bit past, but I want to thank everybody for joining. We had hundreds of people joining over the past hour. Santiago, Alden, Roy, thank you so much. I appreciate your insights, your wisdom. And I just want to remind everybody that we've got the link shared in the chat here to connect with the speakers. And I also want to highlight that we're going to answer every single question that was asked in a blog post that we'll be sending out to the email addresses of those that registered. So we'll be answering those questions and sharing out the answers via blog posts. So, all right, with that, we're going to conclude. Again, thank you, everybody. I hope everybody got something valuable out of this. And keep in touch, because we're going to have another AMA probably around this time next month. So thank you.
Thanks for organizing.
All right, bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.